Hi. I want to start, actually, I've been thinking on your comment about Joseph Campbell, and I just want to, I think it's relevant to what I'm saying and to what all of us are saying to some extent, and that he tends to focus on the good, and that we're focusing on more of the problematic or critique. And I really feel like those two things work together, and in my experience with Campbell, I think that you're right that he really focuses on the good and hopeful. But I would say, and I'd be interested to talk to you more about it, because I think you maybe know Campbell better than me.
It's a good pickup line.
What's that?
It worked. It's a good pickup line.
Yeah, right. That's true. But I think that he focuses a lot on a critique too. Specifically, I think of there's a lot of critique of the Christian myth throughout Campbell's writings. But perhaps he's so eloquent or so focused on hope for a better myth that it comes together well. And I think that's important because you're about to hear more of a critique. And so it's a justification, but also I think that's kind of implicit in what all of us, in the critique that all of us are laying out, is really a kind of a setting for a hopeful change in these mythologies. My take on the role of the mythologist in the postmodern world comes from a background of humanitarian work. So I, like a lot of ambitious and bright-eyed young people, came out of undergraduate and went into nonprofit work, specifically in community work. I've worked in a lot of different, which I'll talk about a little bit, a lot of different areas, but I found time and time again that it just wasn't doing what I thought it should. There was something wrong, and it was really hard for me to identify what that was until I eventually found my way here. And I realized that there was an inherent desire to tend to the soul of the world in that work for me, which comes out a lot of times in that sort of nonprofit community work as a desire to change the world or really have a strong effect or a strong hand on these different communities. So that's what I'm talking about here. For the last 10 years, I have been an employee of various nonprofit organizations doing what is broadly called community work or community organizing. This type of work takes many different forms, but it is in every case grounded in the common pursuit of effecting change. I have worked under a number of different titles, including project manager, union organizer, and project developer. I have worked with a diverse cross-section of communities, including contractors, office workers, the homeless population, politicians, farmers, and most recently, inner-city Memphis neighborhoods. The one thing that I have found to be true of every single community is that each shares a unique and distinct mythology or story. Understanding that mythology is essential to affecting any real or lasting change in the community. A community story is informed by the values, traditions, and customs that a people share, and these shared practices and beliefs really bond a community. They act as a transcendent and ineffable social glue. This story is part of what makes you feel a particular affinity for your neighbor, or sometimes despite having no other obvious commonalities. And it can give you pride in your workplace, or it can be the unspoken bond that a sports team has. Victor Turner calls this bond communitas. Each of us experiences it in our different communities to varying degrees. At the root of this connection is a story that holds unparalleled strength. This story has the power to give community great hope in tough times, or to tear people apart despite apparent comfort and security. At its best, this bonding story can produce profound compassion against all odds. Viktor Frankl's stories of incredible self-sacrifice amidst the horrific conditions of the Holocaust are an example of this, of what this bond can do, and what kind of life it can give people. And when it takes a different turn, the story can develop a culture of shame and hostility, causing the sort of widespread suspicion and violence that we often see in other street gangs or these sorts of communities that sort of tear each other apart. That in my mind, is a mythological or problem as well. The shared mythology of a community is often not explicit. It may be hard or even seemingly impossible to see, but it informs the way people think, shop, eat, talk, and interact every day. Considering the fundamental role of mythology in the lives of individuals, it seems like the active communitas should be the first thing considered in community work. But to the contrary, my experience has shown me that this not only fails to be a primary consideration, but it's rarely considered with any seriousness at all. There are various reasons that in approaching a community, many nonprofit organizations, despite having the best of intentions, which I think truly they do often, overlook or misjudge the importance of the mythology at work. One major problem is a lack of understanding of the importance of communitas. That language doesn't exist out there in a lot of nonprofits. That there's not really, people aren't talking about it, people don't think about it, they don't really have a context to engage this sort of thing. As is the trend of our world at large, nonprofits tend toward a goal-oriented approach that depends on facts and figures to guide the mission. So it's this really hyper-rational mindset that tends to set the mission of the nonprofit, and that makes them miss oftentimes looking at these underlying stories. The result, this often results in losing sight of the unique aspects in the community and of the individuals. The result is both a tendency to blindly import models that have worked in other, often relatively unrelated areas, and also to attempt to look good on paper in order to attract or maintain funding. And unfortunately, that is the bottom line of a lot of nonprofit and community work. When the mythology of the community is not considered deeply, the mission can either simply not work, or it can become damaging or disruptive. I witnessed one such unsuccessful mission while consulting in the South on projects to bring produce into low-income areas that lacked access to fresh food. Despite a variety of innovative approaches, including literally bringing free bags of food to people's doorsteps, the nonprofit efforts were routinely rejected by the communities. The organizations racked their brains over this. In some cases, there had even been preliminary surveys or assessments conducted in the neighborhoods which seemed to say that people wanted this service, yet effort after effort failed. So what happened there? These efforts failed to consider communitas. The nonprofits underestimated the strength of the story that connects the customs, values, and goals of the community. The organizations had used their own values to assess the needs of the communities. They saw people who were in a low-income bracket and thought, oh, we should find a way to bring them food. It seems simple enough. Well, their good intentions did not change the fact that they were outsiders. They didn't really know the people they sought to serve. They didn't understand their myth, so they couldn't integrate their mission into the community's story. The nonprofit workers didn't look, talk, eat, or interact like the people in the community. So they were perceived as strangers, and they were quickly mistrusted. Mm-hmm. Another more intrusive example of this failure to honor the community's myth is illuminated in Ernesto Ciroli's account of an international aid organization he worked with in a small African village. So they were an Italian-based organization that came into a village in Africa. The goal of the mission was to generate more profit potential in the village through setting up efficient farming practices. So it was already an agricultural area, but they wanted to come in and bring tractors and tools and things like that so they could farm more efficiently and produce income. What was quickly discovered was that the villagers were not compelled to generate extra revenue. They were content to work only as much as they needed to live in a basic manner, so they wouldn't come to work every day. This simplicity was a part of their myth. The community workers decided to create an incentive to move their humanitarian project along. They introduced alcohol, radios, and watches into the village. Sure enough, the villagers now had the motivation to work 5 full days a week. Here, the community workers were so driven by the importance of their own values that, in this case, generating capital, that they were compelled to instate those values into this village despite all other considerations. So this is, clearly a disruption of the mythology at work in the community. And it was disastrous from there. And this is actually a common practice. This is not a unique instance. I don't know how much this is happening now, but over the years, this sort of thing has been used as a motivation in a lot of international nonprofit work. I've done mostly domestic work, so I don't know personally, but I've heard this a lot. So my intention here has not been to demean the work of the organizations that are focused on community work. In fact, to the contrary, I believe in the overall intentions, and for this reason have dedicated years of my life to this work. However, there is a need among these organizations to take heed and consider that the myth that is operating within the area is intended to be served. And whether or not it even makes sense to go there. I mean, because an area is poor does not mean that your values, the way that you see them in your head will work, which is that sort of hyper rational mentality is what tends to happen. The organization must look at its own values and goals and then assess those carefully and sincerely in the context of the beliefs and practices of the community in question. Each community, no matter how large or small, has a unique sort of social ecosystem. sometimes even as an emerging mythologist with a heart for community work, my recommendation is to approach our urge to assist not first with action, design, and goals informed by our own values, but instead to develop the capacity to listen and interact with the story that is already being told at the heart of every community. Thank you.